So it's 10:15. I think probably time to get started. I'd like to welcome you all to my presentation. Does DevOps need continuous testing? Feel free at any time to offer your thoughts. I'd like to have a conversation. Of course, I'm glad that we've got testers here in the room too. It's really exciting. I'm Gerie Owen. I'm the VP of Knowledge and Innovation at Qualitas Group for the United States. I've spoken at conferences all over the world. I write on technical topics, especially quality assurance and testing. I'm also an experienced tester, test lead, test architect. That's my picture from the Boston Marathon in 2010. And I think this year they're going to have a cold and rainy Boston Marathon. But anyway, so to go over the agenda. There we are. Okay, so we'll just kind of pose the question, does DevOps need continuous testing? We'll kind of attempt to define it, talk a little bit about what it is and maybe what it isn't. We'll talk about how to implement it, how to streamline the test process, because that's the basis before we even implement continuous testing. We'll talk about a test strategy and maybe wind up with some discussion of monitoring in production. I know for testers that's a difficult topic, but even testing in production is part of continuous testing, I think. So, does DevOps need continuous testing? Well, testing cycles have to shorten. We all know that, right? And with all of the architecture changes, the microservices, we need more high-functioning, quality functional tests as well as non-functional tests. And we need more quality. And finally, our builds, our integrations, our deployment are automated. Testing needs to be automated throughout the process. And as I'll kind of point out later, testing needs to be not just the testing of the code, but the testing of the entire continuous delivery process. So let's talk about what continuous testing is. Well, now that's a big description there. This is what the Forrester Wave decided it is. It's a core capability within Agile and DevOps, where the testing activities are run in a continuously automated fashion, and it's integrated with development and delivery. Sounds good so far. Immediate bug fixing is enabled. Test environments are provisioned instantly so that unit functional and non-functional tests can take place in an automated basis. And all this is orchestrated by your continuous testing delivery tools. So what does that really say? It says continuous testing is about people, processes, tools, just like DevOps. So let's talk about continuous testing versus test automation. Well, test automation is certainly a big part of continuous testing, but it's not the whole thing. And here's the definition that I like better for continuous testing. It's an approach to managing risk, because after all, that's what testing in DevOps is about. And the quality champions are the testers who champion the quality for the business and for the actual customer. So it's an approach to managing risk by focusing not only improving the test efficiency, but also the efficiency and the effectiveness of the continuous delivery process. Now, when you have test automation, you write your automated scripts. You run them, you wait. You test them again, you run them, you wait. Now the difference there with continuous testing, you write the scripts, you integrate it into the code, and you test all through. There's no human intervention there. And it's all automated. So let's go on to the attributes of continuous testing. And there are a few of them here. So, like I had said before, the focus is on business risk. And, that's one thing I I've heard a lot of comments that, our speakers have made so far yesterday that a lot of the same things I'm going to say today, but the one thing that I haven't heard a lot of focus on is business risk. And I think that's a critical part of DevOps, a critical part of continuous testing. That establishes the safety net for continuous delivery, right? If we're not assessing risk, if we don't know where the real risk places are, then we don't know that what we're putting into production is likely to cause a problem. Of course, this requires a stable test environment that's available on demand. It has to integrate seamlessly with the tool chain, and it has to deliver actionable feedback at each stage of the pipeline. This is what I was saying about testing the deployment process, the process of the whole pipeline. So, how do we implement continuous testing? Well, at a high level, we have to engage in the continuous risk analysis and process improvement. We need to increase the velocity and increase the quality of our current processes, and not just quality assurance processes, delivery, code, integration, operations, all of those processes. We need to we can implement those, all that increasing the velocity by automating the entire process. And most importantly, and a lot of our speakers have talked about this, is developing the culture for which the whole team is responsible for quality. We had a little discussion, David and Sean in the back room, in the back there, and a few of us had a discussion last night at the party, and we're talking, they're asking me, well, what's the future? What's the future of testers? And I said, well, automated testing requires an ability to code. And yeah, we can do it, but who's best at doing it? It's the developers, right? So the role I think that QA, that testing is going to be QA. They're going to be responsible for managing the process, whether that's in the beginning with the requirements, making sure that everything is testable, pairing with developers to do TDD and test the code first, working with the operations folks to make sure the deployments are appropriate and there's automated feedback throughout the deployment. I think that's where the test role is going to go. So let's talk about some of the key practices of continuous testing. So you've got defect management. Well, we all know what we do. We test, we find a bug, we toss the bug over the wall. The developer looks at it. Well, it's not happening on my machine. Well, it's core product, da, 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 da. Well, one of the attributes of continuous testing is we don't necessarily report bugs. We discuss our observations, and we fix immediately. So we save all that time in tracking and logging and all that. The next big attribute is the test case management and optimization. We need to be continually, and this is not just, oh, we're going to implement continuous testing. We got to go through all our test cases. We need to be continuously looking at our test cases for their quality, their effectiveness. Are they really testing what we need to test? And then we need to look at our test suites. Are we getting the most bang for the buck out of each test? Because if we have a huge test suite, we have huge test coverage. But if it takes all night to run, that's not going to work. We need to be focusing our test suites on the most critical. We need to focus on the most critical risk-based tests, and we need to get the most out of each test so we can optimize and shrink down the test suite. And we can use advanced analytics. We can use code change impact analysis to determine if we need new tests, if our tests are out of date, if they need retooling. And finally, we can also use it to look at what areas of the application may have been affected. That's a biggie, because sometimes the developers make somebody talked about it yesterday, they make a little change, oh, it's no big deal. Happens to be a big deal sometimes. So we have a few more attributes to look at. Environment, accessibility, and availability. Well, we know as testers and I think as developers too, isn't the environment and data. They're the bane of our existence. There's nothing new here, right? We need an easy access to production-like environments, and we need to be able to spin them up and have automated processes for doing so. We can use service virtualization to include deployment automation, test data creation. This embraces shift left because because that way we can begin testing integrations before they're built or available. And that's critical to shifting left, finding the bugs earlier. That's the only way we get faster. And as I mentioned before, and I'll keep emphasizing this because I think it's really the main point of continuous testing, is that we're testing not only the code, but the process, and getting that automated feedback at every step. So before you can implement continuous testing practices, you need to streamline the process. So let's talk a little bit about doing that. So streamlining the process is kind of three parts. Again, mitigating business risk, because that's the real key to it all. Optimizing the test suite, we talked a little bit about that already. And identifying and mitigating bottlenecks. So let's focus on mitigating business risk. So how do we do this? So we've got to focus on the customer. What features do they use? So if we make a change to something that the customer never uses, sometimes we'll add features that the customer may not even want. If we understand our business, it's critical to really understand the business because then we know what's going to be important to the customer. We can also talk to the customer too to find those things out. We need to understand the competitive climate of the organization. Is it critical to get to market first? Some organizations it is. So what do we do then? We test in production. What if we're building a self-driving car or a pacemaker? I don't think getting to production first is critical there. In fact, I don't think we necessarily want to. So in those cases, we're talking about potential loss of life. We can't rush forward. But we need to understand that. We need to understand the nuances of the business. And as we understand the nuances of the business and we understand the risk, then we can map that to our requirements, our test cases, and our tests. And then from there, we want to optimize the test suite so that we get the greatest amount of coverage for the least number of tests. Remember, the biggest bang for our buck. And then we want to report status, but when we report status, well, we ran 250 tests in 5 minutes, and they all passed. Yeah, so we need to be reporting status in a way. We need to tell a story. We need to tell the story of the risk to the customer. And that I think a lot of people that don't like metrics, if you start use them to tell a story, that's going to help. So let's talk about how we optimize the test scope. The test scope gets automated by selecting end-to-end tests that focus on the risk, right? We need to understand all the integrations thoroughly too, because we need to understand how the business workflow, what happens when a user enters an order? Where does it go? What's the end-to-end process? What's the output? Where can there be the glitches? We can implement service virtualization for the integrations and components, but until we understand where it's likely to break, we can't really put together a strategy for that. And we always want to use the most realistic data as possible. Maybe we can use real users too, to show it to us. And as much as automation is a key component, we still have to save a little time to do some of that exploratory testing. That's where we're going to find usability, accessibility issues. If we don't do that, then we could have bugs that would really, really impact our users. So once we've optimized the test scope, we need to take a look at mitigating bottlenecks. An optimized test suite is critical to increasing velocity, but even more important is identifying and mitigating the bottlenecks. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So why do we mitigate bottlenecks? Well, bottlenecks impede velocity. You know, that's just kind of common sense. So if we identify the bottlenecks, we need to look at their consequences, and then we find a way to mitigate and manage them, and that will help us prevent future bottlenecks. You know, we want to do a retrospective. Well, what we do work? So let's talk about some examples of bottlenecks that we can have. So bottlenecks often show up in the way of constraints. A lot of them can be found from requirements through post-production checkout. Sometimes the testers aren't even involved in backlog refinement. So stories can be put together that are not testable, or the developers and the whole team don't really fully understand what the product owner was getting at. So the requirements aren't fully understood. Maybe the testers aren't included in sprint planning. Maybe the sprint planning isn't done at all. So maybe nobody knows, you know, we have no way of tracking our velocity. There could be issues with addressing defects. Maybe we're accumulating technical debt. You know, maybe we're just patching things rather than doing things, taking a little more time and doing things the correct way. Regression suites can be running too long. Maybe they're not effective. And you know, post-production checkout may still be done manually. There can be blockages anywhere along the line. But I think the biggest constraint is that the team isn't all aligned with taking responsibility for quality. You know, that's I think the key to continuous testing. And you know, I think there's lots of ways of addressing that. We can do some pairing between the team, you know, with developers and testers. We can talk about it, but again, you know, metrics tell us something. So I think one of the best ways of getting the team in alignment to be really concerned about quality is a dashboard. This is our dashboard that we use at Qualitest. This is a tool that we've developed that we can bring in metrics from multiple systems, Gerie, HP, ALM, ServiceNow, any tool that you want, TestRail. And this dashboard can be set up. This particular one is set up for automation. You can set it up to manage the velocity. We can do agile boards, KPIs. But what that does is it shows you right there, well, you know, what's going on. And if everybody has access to this, everybody looks at it, you know, you're going to see where the bottlenecks are. And, you know, who wants to be a bottleneck? I don't think anybody wants to be a bottleneck, but, you know, you see where you're doing it. This gives people say, oh, well, okay, this is, you know, okay, so maybe we're not getting good enough requirements, so the code's not doing well. Maybe, you know, maybe the defects aren't being addressed fast enough. You can kind of see that through dashboards. So now that we have the team in alignment, let's talk about a continuous testing strategy. But meanwhile, any questions so far? Any comments? No? Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the testing strategy. So at a high level, the components, we need to both increase velocity and quality. We need to test throughout the build and delivery pipeline. We need to automate not only the testing, but the checkpoints. We need to amplify feedback loops. We need to shift left on the non-functional as well as the functional testing. And we need to monitor continuously in both test and production. You know, again, we need those feedback loops. We need to know we need to know up front when we're starting to hit a problem. Now, defects, management, automation, analytics, all part of it. So let's go ahead and talk about each one of those. So how do we increase velocity and quality? Kind of would seem like you're going to have one or the other, but that's not really true. I think the top of the most important part is the shift left. push the automation to the base of the testing pyramid. I know how many of you are familiar with the testing pyramid. A lot of times you have a testing ice cream cone. Anybody familiar with that term? An ice cream cone would be, if you flip this over, then you're going to have your manual tests at the top, the big ball of ice cream. So you've got so many automated tests that, you know, that should be manual, and so on down the line. So, but you want most of your tests, you want your unit tests, the most automation in your unit tests, and then your component, then your integration, then your systems tests. So you're only allowing a little bit of manual for your usability, your accessibility, your user acceptance. You can do this with TDD, BDD, pairing tester with developers, and you have to include that risk-based manual anyway. I mean, the little peak is still there. You want to implement continuous non-functional testing as well. I mean, you need performance, you need security, availability, accessibility, and through all this, amplify the automated feedback loops that really help with the decision making. You know, when you can go to the product owner and say, well, this isn't ready because, they're more likely to accept it. And how do we improve quality? Well, talked about some of these. Developers need to embrace testing. Entire team is responsible for quality. We need to monitor post-production. We even should implement testing post-production. And I know there was a talk that was given at DevOps Days London, where the lady, I forget what company it was, but she gave a talk on how they moved all of their testing post-production. She was like, wow. But it worked. It worked for them. Of course, they didn't have a life-threatening product that they were producing, but you know, sometimes that can be done. So how do we implement testing throughout the delivery pipeline? Well, we need to automate the tests at each stage. So we've got the unit tests, the integration, code analysis to the commit. And the only thing manual here is the UAT and the deploy to production. Those are the only parts that should be triggered manually. And there's only one thing on this slide that I would add is automated feedback in all of the arrows. And remember, it's not just about automating the layers of testing, but it's also verifying the deployment. Because you know, you could have everything tested, you could have all the code tested, but if something happens in the deployment, things can go wrong. So let's talk a little bit more about implementing the automated testing checkpoints. You want unit tests to verify code. You want components to verify key features. Integration tests verify workflows involving multiple applications, and this is where you can use service virtualization if you don't have all your components. Again, risk-based automated regressions prior to each deployment. Post-production health checks just to verify the application is up and running. And then production monitoring. You know, things like A/B testing, canary testing. You want to bring all that in. That will, you want to find both defects, functional defects, as well as performance issues before they impact the customer. And the only way you're going to do that is through continuous production monitoring. So let's talk a little bit more about shifting left. So shift left really is more than just shifting left in the functional testing space. I mean, that's where we talk a lot about shifting left, but the non-functional needs to shift left too. Performance testing, it's critical to start performance testing as early as you possibly can, because a lot of performance testing defects, they're ones that are in the design. And if you're testing at the end, it's a little too late to fix the design, and that's where you'll start building the technical debt. And the technical debt is a bottleneck. So one of the ways that you can get that going is use functional tests the tools that can create multi-purpose scripts. Now there are tools out there that can test performance along with the functional tests. I mean, you want to be certain of your cross-browser. All of the scripts, your tools should create scripts that run on desktop, web, mobile, server. You want to have cross-browser testing. You don't want a tool that just tests Chrome. I mean, you need to be able to test Chrome, Edge, Safari, and any other browsers that your particular application uses. Your performance testing, you should be collecting the performance scripts, the page loads, and all that as you do your functional testing. And there are tools that can do it. So your choice of tool is really important here. And of course, the more you combine, you're getting more out of your scripts. And then security testing. Well, there's two pointers to security testing. I mean, one is validating that the code is written in a secure way, and this is where your security analysts should be in there right up front. Shift left to them too, And then you need to also be testing the workflow security. How, is there security issues as the user works their way through the actions that they want to take, their journey through your application. And that's all pretty critical. So let's talk just a little bit about continuous monitoring and testing in production. So continuous monitoring, I mean, it comes from the DevOps principle of amplifying feedback loops, right, in both testing and production. It enables the collection and analysis of data through the metrics, and they can be throughout the life cycle, and that's what's going to automate your user experience. Most important data is about how users are interacting with the system. If you don't know how your users are using the system, then how do you know what the most important features are that you're testing? This allows the stakeholders and the teams to make targeted adjustments on what they're going to release. We can do functional enhancements if there's particular pain points for customers. We do upgrades to the test environment to improve performance. There may even be a security defect. Let's hope not. But as we get to know our users, we can implement changes, and we can catch things ahead of time. Usually testing in production includes monitoring the data and the transactions, which a lot of our operations people will be happy to help with. Simulating transactions, if we know what the users are doing, then we can simulate them. Get real users in, if at all possible, get those users in. And A/B testing, that's another point that's really critical to testing in production. You want to find out, that gives you more information about the users. So, quick summary. Continuous testing is an approach to managing risk by focusing not only on implementing, optimizing tests, but eliminating bottlenecks. So that increases the effectiveness of our test processes. It's based about risk. It's managing the customer. It's managing the customer's expectations. So automated testing is obviously a key practice here. Continuous testing strategy relies on optimization and eliminating bottlenecks. And, well, does DevOps need continuous testing? Yes? Yes? Okay. All right. I have a few references here. I assume all your testers have seen Katrina's book. I think that's an invaluable resource. Another book that I really like is John Willis and Company. I know a lot of the speakers showed that yellow book. That's a real good book too. Forrester Wave will give you some ideas on the tools, and the tools, especially the ones that you can do multiple types of testing with. And I want to thank you all for your time. Really enjoyed meeting you all, and I'll be around if you'd like to have a conversation. Thank you.